What's up, everybody, and welcome to TinkTink.org Interviews. I'm your host, Josh Wilson, here today with our guest, CEO and co-founder of Reverge Studios and game design extraordinaire, Mr. Richard Wyckoff. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing good. Hello, everybody.
All right. So, Richard, you've had quite a career in the gaming industry. It's spanned about 17 years, I'd say. You've been in Looking Glass, DreamWorks Interactive, BioWare, Pandemic. And more recently, you formed Reverge Studios. Now, how did all that start, and what made you have a desire to get in gaming as a field of work?
My gaming career definitely started by being a gamer. Actually, since I first got my hands on a computer, honestly, and Atari 2600 when I was a kid. Through high school and college, I played all sorts of different video games. The original 8-bit NES, got into PC gaming around the pre-VGA era. We had a Tandy 1000, played games like King's Quest 4 and Space Quest 1 and 2 in glorious 16-color PC graphics. And I realized very, very late, I will say extraordinarily late, as in my last 6 months of college, that not only were games something that I could play, but real people were paid to make them. I don't know where I thought they came from, but once I figured out that it was a job that people could have, despite the fact that I had really been going to school for an English degree and had sort of fancied myself a writer up until that point, my work study had been games, and I realized that writing plus interest in games could translate into game design. I was also lucky that my job in college in the computing center had connected me with a few people who knew the Looking Glass crew, because I was at a school called Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and Looking Glass was just a couple hours up the road in Boston. It also turned out that both of the founders of Looking Glass, Paul Neurath and Ned Lerner, were Wesleyan graduates as well. Although I didn't actually get directly connected to Paul and Ned. Instead, people working at Looking Glass knew people working with me, and so then I found out that Looking Glass, my favorite company of the time, was in my neck of the woods of New England, and I had an in there. So I applied on graduation, and it took a while, as it can, to get in the industry. In my case, it was 8 months after graduation before they finally had a spot for me. And when they did, it wasn't design initially. I jumped in being an associate producer and kind of handling the localization, all the translations coming in and out on Flight Unlimited. I even wound up basically being a producer running post-ship stuff for Flight, like a couple demo versions and some other localizations, like a Japanese version. Shortly after that, I got to do actual design stuff, but that's how I got my start.
Sorry. So by the time you got to Looking Glass, is this pre or post System Shock?
Post. System Shock came out, in fact, while I was waiting to get the job, so that helped kill some of the time. I think it had shipped maybe 3 months before. I started in around February, I guess, of 90. Let's see if I graduated in 94. February 95, I think. That's when I started. Oh my God, that means your 17-year estimate was accurate. I didn't like hearing that number. Yeah, so they had recently shipped Shock, and they were in the finishing stages of Flight at that point.
Very nice. So you worked at DreamWorks Interactive, and they published Jurassic Park Trespasser.
Yes.
Did you play a part in this game?
Yes, I did. I was a designer on that project. In fact, I was the first dedicated designer hired on by the lead designer, Austin Grossman. Towards the end of the project, we added a couple more guys, but I wound up designing, like doing the basic plans for maybe half to or so of the levels in the game, and I built at least a third of them, and I made a lot of trees that were floating float less.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, when it came out, the game was definitely ambitious. I mean, the technology at the time, it was blowing people's minds. I mean, like ragdoll physics. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody had heard of that at the time. But it does have a cult following, but it didn't exactly come together as well as everyone would have hoped. Um, what do you think might have kind of went wrong in the development?
Well, I've worked on a number of games like Trespasser, starting there and since, and it's really a classic story of trying to do new features, new game designs. You never know what is actually going to work and what's going to be fun, and it takes dedication, organization, a willingness to fail, and of course, near infinite funding to take the amount of time it takes to keep trying those features and even be entirely willing to say, hey, you know what, none of this that we originally envisioned is working. We're going to replace it with something completely different. And although I was only there in maybe the last half of Trespasser, it had been going for a long time already when I got there, and I think it was at least a year later than anyone had hoped. So it was getting a little bit expensive for DreamWorks, and just everyone generally knew it needed to ship. So again, like a number of games I've been on, in the end, we just had to get what was there into some kind of state that could be shippable. I'm glad, if simultaneously a little bit surprised that so many people still adore it to this day, because it does have so many problems. But
I have played it, and that hand is crazy. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. The core of what I wanted to see in the game is definitely there. I wanted this outdoor, non-shooting adventure and exploration. And yeah, we had some proper video gamey type puzzles, and that's necessary to make a game. But it was an exploration, and the environment was interesting to go through, and we spent a lot of time trying to be sure that I guess I would say the flow, so the story that was inherent in just the environments and the places you went through were interesting and consistent. We had the voiceover, but I think as much of the story of that game is just what you see in the places that you visit and look at. So who knows, maybe someday me or someone else will make that type of game again, the game that's not just like a shoot everything first-person game, and really deliver on what we were hoping to do.
So you're saying there could be a sequel then?
Well, I'm not sure I would go out of my way to try to license the Jurassic Park license in order to do that. But a spiritual sequel, yeah, possibly. I only wish Kinect were a little bit better, because wouldn't that be the thing to do the arm with?
That would probably go perfect with it.
So someday.
So you also worked at BioWare and Pandemic. What
Yeah.
games did you work on when you were part of that studio?
So I was with Pandemic from before we were BioWare Pandemic, and in my time there, I worked on the Full Spectrum Warrior games, both 1 and 2, and actually even the Army version of FSW. And then after FSW 2, I was working away on one of the canceled games when Pandemic got shut down. It's the one that's been leaked around the web as Mercs Incorporated. And it wound up over at EA, and as far as I know, it's not going on anymore. No, I'm not there. That was another one of those, like, let's do new things type of games, so there was a lot of experimentation going on. Pandemic, in many ways, was spiritually akin to, I guess, to Looking Glass, even, and to DreamWorks. Like, they were constantly trying new design, and that's why I wanted to join the company in the first place. So I would say most of my best work would be on the Full Spectrum Warrior games there.
Nice. So, did you have anything to do or any part of the Star Wars Battlefront series?
No, I was not involved with those, although, as you have probably heard, the lead designer of Skullgirls, Mike Zaymont, was on the Battlefront teams. And in fact, my understanding is that the lightsaber combat starting from Battlefront 1 is Mike's baby. So he was doing the hand-to-hand from the beginning.
So currently, you're the CEO and founder of Reverge Studios, with your latest endeavor being the crazy-looking yet extremely polished fighter Skullgirls. Congrats on shipping that, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
So how is being the CEO, aka the guy in charge, different from any of the other previous positions you've held?
One thing I discovered is that it's no easier to be at the top than to be in the middle somewhere, because for one thing, now I have to take on all that responsibility of being sure that we can get paid, and being sure that we find publishers to pay us, and we have more work, and that we're fixing things in the games that we're doing, and doing things better in the future. So all that fun new responsibility that, once again, is not what most people would consider being related to game design. And even though I'm technically, well, I am the boss, a boss can't and shouldn't just say, you do this, you do that. There is an equal amount of negotiation with the people working for you, from management down, as there is when you're trying to ask your boss to let you do something or to give you more time, that kind of thing. So it's just that now, I mean, I was a lead designer on FSW 2, so I am familiar with managing people, but if I had any naive notions that anything would get easier being the top manager in the company, the last couple years has definitely made it clear that there's no difference.
So, do you still dabble in design?
I do.
I mean, if a game's coming out and you're like, I'm pulling rank, I want to design, type of thing.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't. I've worked for managers who do it in that way, obviously, and you really don't. You can't say oh, I'm taking over and I don't want it to go in this way. Skullgirls is great because Skullgirls is what Mike and Alex wanted it to be, and my role was to give them the support to make sure the company was working well, the schedule was working well. The additional resources that were needed to achieve their vision were all there. My design contributions were relatively small, mostly because they weren't needed, because it's such a great team to begin with. Little bits about certain elements of certain UI screens here and there. I actually did a fair amount of programming on the user interface, which was not initially planned, just to kind of help fill in the gap. In the future, and in the new games we're pitching to publishers right now, I am basically working as, I think I would describe it as an executive producer based on other companies I've worked for. So I'm taking ideas that other people have had. One or two of the ideas I've had more input into than Skullgirls, for instance, because that was a complete idea when it came to us and when we formed Reverge. But nonetheless, I'm still mostly guiding and shaping rather than specifically designing. And I don't really foresee a time when I'll be directly designing a game myself, just because that would take so much of my time away from managing the company that would be a problem for the company. Which is a bit unfortunate, because I do consider myself a game designer still, but it's more important that Reverge exists so that we can keep sponsoring such amazing teams and creating more cool stuff like Skullgirls.
So, are there any new projects that Reverge is working on, and if so, could you spare any details?
Nothing that I can actually talk about right now. Not just for secrecy reasons, but also because the typical way that game concept design happens is there will be all sorts of great ideas. A lot of people will put in hard work on art and documents and maybe even demos and prototypes, but you never know which ones are really going to catch, which ones are going to find funding or work out the best. So talking about a game idea too early, and I would consider too early as anything before the time where Skullgirls was when we first heard about it, which was a character was about 80% complete. It was Philia, and the game was playable. I don't think I would ever really publicly discuss any of our games until they were that far along, because at that point it was immediately obvious what Skullgirls was and what it needed to be a fully shippable game. And from there, we were able to talk really confidently to publishers and eventually to all the public. Actually, many people had already seen it since Mike and Alex had been showing it off at some various conventions up until then. So we were able to say it's going to be this with all the characters and all the features you expect from a fighting game. So I want to continue that for all our future projects.
So don't hype it up just for it to crash and burn. So good plan.
Right.
So is there anything you'd like to say to the fans of your work in previous games?
Well, I already said what I would say about Trespasser, I think. I mean, Trespasser, I was incredibly excited to go work for DreamWorks because it represented to me the obvious next step in what Looking Glass was doing. I went to Looking Glass because my favorite game in the world was Ultima Underworld 1 and 2 and System Shock, but I think I still like the Underworlds even better. I really liked these ideas of first-person, almost, as we used to say back then, virtual reality type of games. And it's just unfortunate that at the same exact time, Doom and Quake were out and becoming more popular, and instead of first-person becoming the ultimate form for adventure, it became the ultimate form for shooting at things with a gun. So to Trespasser fans, I want to get back there someday. I think that first person can be about much, much more than just shooting at stuff. And there are some interesting games. Not that I've played it yet, but Amnesia, The Dark Descent, that's a very, very interesting approach to first person. I'd like to find out how to do more of that kind of stuff. I kind of feel like there's a need in the industry for, at least spiritually, what we were doing with Full Spectrum Warrior as well. Game design aside, which I think could have stood a lot of revision, the notion of a game where you really are part of a functional, realistic army unit, because no warfare takes place with one hero, outside of Michael Bay's fantasies. So, like, a game that's really about what soldiers have to go through, and as I was joking to someone the other day, a game that has the thing that even in FSW we didn't portray, which is that if a squad of guys goes into battle and they have a single casualty, that's it, the battle is over, they go back. I want to make that game someday. Maybe even the Full Metal Jacket of video games, where you spend the first 2/3 of the game, or at least half, in training camp. That half can be an adventure game, maybe a Trespasser style, and then you have one battle, one of your guys gets shot, and that's the end of the game. How about that?
Sounds amazing. So, do you have any advice out there for future game designers and CEOs out there?
If you are wanting to get into games in general, and especially game design, the absolute best thing you can do is make stuff on your own. I've been recommending practically since the beginning of my career, learning one or the other 3D shooters, level editors, and these days they're just so robust and powerful. I mean, look, much of the mod community, and as we would now call them, the indie game developers, get their start by modding something like Unreal or maybe Crytek. So that is just a great thing to do, because you will learn how to express the ideas and visions you have in your head in tools and in technology that are what we actually use in the games industry. So if you want to make games, there's nothing better you can do than go mod something. And if you want to run a studio, be prepared for years of misery. There we go. That's my positive message. It's a hard life. I honestly don't know how I wound up doing this, but I think I did it more because someone had to. Emil, my co-founder, and I mean, we wanted to make a company and have a shot at doing some of the things in the slightly different way that we wanted to do, and someone had to actually take on the role of the business and management side of it, and it sure wasn't going to be Emil, the programmer, so that pretty much wound up being me.
There you go.
I hope I'm good enough at it that we get to have many years ahead of us.
Hopefully so. Hopefully so. Well, everybody, since you're already here, you might as well check out our YouTube channel, and be sure to visit our site, TinkTink.org, for all your gaming needs. Also, be sure to check out Skullgirls, which is available now on PSN and XBLA. Special thanks to our guest, Mr. Richard Wyckoff, for talking with us today. And this has been Josh Wilson. As always, thanks for listening to TinkTink.org interviews.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks, everyone.